Hello everyone and welcome back to Station Meets, where I talk to some of the university societies, officials and academics. This morning I'm joined by Professor Sir Ian Boyd, former Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and currently a Professor of Biology here at the University of St Andrews, where he also serves as Chair of the Environmental Sustainability Board. It's lovely to have you. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Good morning.
So first of all, could you please outline what COP26 is and why it's so important?
Well, COP26 happens, I think it's every second year, actually. Well, not COP26, COP, the Conference of Parties, as it's called, happens every second year for any UN international agreements. So this is the agreement on climate change, and COP15 happened, or not COP15. It was the COP in the Paris COP. It happened in 2015. I can't remember which number it was, but it happened in 2015, and it set the 1.5 degree centigrade target for us not to exceed a 1.5 degree centigrade increase target. But it didn't set out how that would be achieved. And I remember at the time thinking, actually, this is going to be really difficult. Many of the people, I was in government at the time, many of the people came back from that COP feeling really pleased with themselves. But a number of us, including myself, were saying, yes, that's all very well, but in order to get to that target, you need to do something really quite extraordinary. So COP26 was set up really to try and do that extraordinary thing. In other words, to try and make sure that that countries were compliant, that they were putting forward proper plans for carbon emissions reductions, and up to a point that has happened, but there are still quite a lot of gaps, unfortunately. So I think that I think it will come out in the wash what that actually means, but basically it means that the Paris Agreement is not really going to be achievable, which is pretty much, I think, what many of us thought at the time the Paris Agreement was agreed, unfortunately.
So you mentioned there some of the potential downfalls and shortcomings. So given that the planet is already on course to warm by more than 2 degrees by the end of the century, should the emphasis moving forward be more on climate adaptation or mitigation?
I think it's got to be on both, and it's got to be on both at very ambitious levels. But the reality is that even if we mitigate, we're not going to get to a 1.5 degree target. And we are, as a result of that, going to have to adapt. And that adaptation is going to be, depending on where you are and who you are, is going to be pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, the summit's first major deal, which was a commitment by over 100 world leaders to end and reverse deforestation by 2030, it's been heralded as a major achievement. But given that similar pledges were made in 2014 to little effect, is there cause for optimism in COP26?
Well, I think the optimism is that we're going in the right direction, but it's nowhere near fast enough. And with respect to deforestation, one of the problems is that we don't even have a proper definition of deforestation. And if you don't have proper definition, what countries will do is they'll choose whatever definition they want that's convenient to them. And as a result, we don't end up going very far. We might go a little bit down the road, but we won't go very far down the road. So there is a lot of obfuscation going on, and as a result of that, I'm not really sure that many of the pledges that have been given in COP26 will actually result in the outcomes that people have pledged. In fact, very few of them will, probably.
COP26 has also been accused of providing a platform for the promises of powerful polluters such as Jeff Bezos and other leaders. Is it realistic to believe that individuals who benefit from the status quo are going to bring about the kind of changes that we need to see?
I mean, that's a good question. Probably not. I think that there's huge vested interests sitting there, and those vested interests, have their hands if not on the strings of power, actually very close to the strings of power. And the result of that is that they're not going to change things very rapidly. I mean, they'll change things at their convenience, but not at anybody else's convenience. So, yeah, I mean, on the other hand, it's good that they're there. It's good that they're saying some of these sorts of things, because they might be in the, if I go back 10, 15 years, people like that were just denying that there was a problem. So we've at least moved on. In that they're now engaging with the fact that there's a problem, but are they engaging totally and honestly? The chances of that are quite small, and that's for those individuals, but it's also the nations that they're a part of, and actually many nations in the world.
I mean, you mentioned it's good that they're there, but there are several really powerful world leaders who aren't there. They've declined their invitation to COP26. And although they've sent delegations to Glasgow, the size of their country's carbon footprint, given that, are the ambitions of COP26 all in vain without the cooperation of leaders such as Xi Jinping, for example?
Well, of course, they're not all in vain. It's doing something. But yet you're right that if some of the biggest carbon emitters are not present and are not making appropriate levels of or setting appropriate levels of ambition, then it all sort of feels a little bit phony, and I think it probably is quite phony, actually, because I don't think the evidence suggests to us that some of these COPs are making very much difference. But the question is, what's the alternative? And right now, there isn't really an alternative, other than a sort of go-it-alone policy by all countries, and then it's just a race to the bottom, really, which is absolutely the last thing that we would want. So it's pretty challenging, because we don't have a plan B fundamentally, and we know that the direction of travel is going to be extraordinarily difficult for many parts of the world, actually including many of the richer nations as well. I think we've just got to brace ourselves for some of the effects that will come over the next 20 or 30 years.
So that's been really interesting to hear your opinion on COP26, and I want to talk about your role on the Environmental Sustainability Board. So first of all, what are the aims and responsibilities of that board?
Well, the board is there to reflect the views of the university community about what the university should be doing to deliver sustainability. And the first thing it did was to come up with a draft strategy. It's called Net Zero 2035. The objective is in the title, and of course it wasn't for the Environmental Sustainability Board to accept that. It was for the Environmental Sustainability Board to give that to the university, to the governing body of the university, which is the University Court, and for them to adopt it, and they did. So they have adopted that strategy, net zero by 2035. And then it's for the Environmental Sustainability Board to try to pick up the implementation process for that. In other words, all the things that we need to do as an institution and as individuals within an institution in order to achieve that objective. So we're partly there to develop the ideas, and to pass them over to the university executive and all the schools, the university structure to implement. And we're partly there to look at how the university is getting on and to challenge and to potentially criticize, but support. It's a supportive role rather than a combative role, if you know what I mean.
So can you tell us about any of the measures that have been implemented so far in order to reach that goal that you outlined?
Well, we came up with the concept of a St. Andrews forest. What we've done so far is looked at the carbon accounts. And when I say carbon, I'm actually not talking just about carbon emissions here, we're talking about sustainability overall. So it's about water, it's about waste, it's about biodiversity, it's about human health, it's about all those things, it's about air quality, and it's about carbon. And carbon is a good, is a bit of a surrogate for that. It's an indicator. So we've looked at all the accounts, and we know that the university can't get to net zero by 2035 or net zero at all unless it absorbs carbon. And it's like that for every other institution virtually. So when you hear that institutions are going net zero by 2025 and things like that, there's an awful lot of greenwashing in there. I mean, that's one thing that I've learned from looking into the university's situation, is that those organizations that claim a net zero by a date which is sometime this side of 2030 are almost certainly not being very honest about it, or they're just using what we call scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which are simply just the emissions they produce from, let's say, heating and a little bit of internal travel and those sorts of things. So the university needs to absorb carbon, and so one of the things the Environmental Sustainability Board has been doing is looking at that, and it's proposed the creation of the St Andrews forests. Now, you know, that is literally the creation of trees to absorb carbon, but it's actually more than that. It's about how do we absorb carbon through nature-based solutions. So it could be seagrass meadows, for example, it could be peatlands, but all of these things are on the table. And that's currently beginning to gather pace. And then there are a number of other initiatives around procurement. In other words, you know, can we deliver the information to people in the university about the sustainability of the things they are buying so that they can make better choices, for example. So that there's an initiative going on about that as well. And there are a number of other ones like that, all of which are designed to try and cut down the amount of carbon we produce, most of which is in terms of what we buy and also how we travel. So that's where most of the carbon in the university, carbon emissions in the university sits, and we need to change those. But in order to change those, we actually need to change people's choices and behaviours. The university can only do so much in terms of insulating buildings and things like that. And actually, although people tend to think about those sorts of things being the immediate needs of carbon reduction, actually they make a relatively small contribution compared with all the stuff we buy and the amount we travel. So we're going to have to buy less stuff and buy more intelligently, and travel less and travel more intelligently.
Professor St.Ation Boyd, thank you again for your time this morning, and for all of you for watching. You can look forward to more station coverage of the events in Glasgow coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you.